Hey everyone, welcome to Armchair Technician. Today we're going to be doing a very useful mod to a classic pedal that has always notoriously been lacking in power options. But first, a little bit of history. Introduced in 1969, the Big Muff Pi has been the flagship distortion sustainer pedal for the Electro-Harmonics Corporation. Over the next several decades, the Big Muff took on various shapes and sizes, but always maintained its signature creamy sound and long sustain. According to some, the only fatal design flaw is the lack of a DC power jack. This particular unit today is a Russian-made black box Big Muff from around the year 2000. So we're going to take this awesome pedal and make it even better with a modern update. Okay, so we've got this thing taken apart. Now normally I would remove all the pots and the switch and everything, but this indicator light here is apparently glued in to the chassis of the stomp box, and I don't really care to detach that because I don't know, it might not go back together the way that I want it to. But I've got plenty of room of clearance up here in this area to work with. First thing I'm going to do is drill the hole here where the 9-volt power jack is going to be mounted. And to do that, I'm going to measure with this ruler to see where the exact middle is going to be, because I want it to look as good as possible, possibly even that it might have been factory installed. So we're going to put it exactly in the middle here in the center of the front of the box. When you're drilling through metal, a lot of things can go wrong, especially I want to be really careful since this pedal doesn't belong to me. I'm working on this for a guy, so what I'm going to do before I drill the bigger hole, I'm going to drill a smaller pilot hole here just to give me a guide and just to make sure when I start drilling the larger hole the bit doesn't move around on me and I get a nice clean placement on where this jack is going to be installed. I also wanted to make a point too that when you're drilling through a pretty thin piece of metal like this, you don't want to press too hard down on the metal with the drill bit. You want to let the drill bit do the work, because you definitely don't want to bend or make an indentation in this thing. That would make your job a lot harder and a lot harder to explain to your customer. So make sure you have some really good sharp drill bits before you do this. I'm also placing a rag underneath the drilling spot here so none of the metal shards fall down here and I might not see them. It can get stuck on something. I just want to make sure that none of the metal that gets drilled out of here falls on any of the electronic components. So we're going to start out nice and easy here. Okay, there's our pilot hole. To get our larger hole, we're going to use what's called a step bit. It looks like this. You can see on each increment the measurement is listed to how wide in diameter the hole is going to be. So for this particular jack, it's a little bit smaller than a ½ an inch, so we're going to go up here to the 7/16, and I'm going to stop there. I'm going to drill through, that would be about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 notches down. Then we're going to stop and just make sure we don't over drill, because it's a lot easier to go one extra step than to take one too many away. Also, when you're drilling through metal, especially with a step bit like this, it's always important to put a couple drops of oil on the bit itself, because these, obviously it's going to generate friction and heat. Now for sheet metal that's this thin, sometimes you can skip this step, but it's better to be safe than sorry here. So now we're going to push through to the 7/16 step on this step bit. Short, small bursts are probably best. There we got through 1, 2, 3, Okay, so we have a nice shiny new hole here, but as you can see it's jagged around the inside edges here. So what I'm going to do is take a file and just gently brush off those rough edges just so they don't cause any problems later. So we've got the jack installed here. I think it looks pretty good. When you're tightening these things up though, and this is with any switch or jack or pot or anything that has a nut on the end of it, always use a wrench instead of a pair of pliers or something. You're just going to get it a lot tighter, and you're not going to strip out or round out the nut. You know, a set of wrenches doesn't cost that much, and it's totally worth it. Okay, so we've got this DC power jack mounted to the chassis of this big Muff. We're going to start hooking up the leads for this thing. Now, one thing that's important to remember, this jack is what a lot of people call a Boss style jack. So it's like the famous jack that all the Boss pedals have. Most modern pedals have these jacks already installed on them. For some reason, Electro-Harmonics back in the day didn't do that because they're assholes. But anyway, the Boss style jack has a negative center post. That little post that's poking out in the center here, that's the ground. So you have to make sure the wires that you connect on the inside correspond to that. The positive is the ring on the outside. Now I personally use a one-spot adapter, which a lot of people use these, and it says right here on the bottom, this is a little hard to see, however it has the diagram here. This is the negative on this side, and it's showing it going into the center of this circle in the middle here, and then the positive is on this side, and it's sort of encircling the outside of the center. So you need to double check. Some power jacks are the opposite. So you need to make sure, if you're doing this mod yourself, that you wire this up correctly to fit the configuration that your other pedals are using and also your power jack. Very important. One cool feature about these jacks in particular, and this is something that if you're going to do this mod, you definitely want to order one like this. This is a switched jack, meaning that if you don't have a power source plugged into it, like from your power adapter cable, if this is not plugged in, then you can use a standard 9-volt battery inside of it, and it'll function just as it was designed to, actually. But if you plug this in, if you have a wall jack like this that's plugged in, it automatically switches inside, so it bypasses any 9-volt juice that's coming from this. So that's definitely a necessary feature, but make sure when you buy a jack like this that you get one that's switched on the inside. So we're going to start soldering these leads onto the new power jack, but I wanted to make a note. When you're soldering wires inside of a pedal, your iron doesn't need to be that hot. I have mine set at 700 degrees Fahrenheit, which is plenty hot to do this. Now for amp work, I usually have it up to like 8 or sometimes 850 depending on what I'm doing. But it's really easy to melt these little tiny wires with your iron if you hold it on there too long. So just make sure your setting is at no more than 700, I would say. That should be plenty to solder on these tiny little wires over here. Okay, so I've got the power jack all wired up here. There's 3 different posts up here. 2 of them are positive and 1 of them is the ground here. One bummer is that I had to splice some wire extensions to this new 9-volt clip because the leads on this weren't long enough to really give any clearance to like plug in a battery once the unit is closed up and everything. So that's what this electrical tape is here, and I've got some heat shrink tubing around this one that I had to make a splice in there. I don't like to do that just because it looks crappy, but it's totally going to be functional, and unless somebody opens it up, nobody's going to ever know the difference. Also, I reattached this ground wire that was hanging loose when I opened up the pedal earlier, and this nut here was just kind of tossing around inside of the case. So I tightened that thing back down, and now we're going to put it back together and test it out. Sounds like a big muff. I think we can call it a day on that one. Okay, well that wraps it up for today. We hope you liked the video. Please like, comment, and share below, and we'll see you next time on Armchair Technician.